All right, we're welcoming back multiple time Surf Splendor guest, two-time Icons of Foam shaping champion, 40-year board builder, Roger Hinds is our guest today. In addition to making his own Roger Hinds surfboards, he also makes Bear Surfboards, which is a label you might recognize from the iconic 1978 John Milius film, Big Wednesday. There's 3 different gun models that were featured in that film that he makes. There's limited quantities of them available right now at Bing Surfboards. So if you can get those while supplies last, great. If not, you could track Roger down at rogerhindssurfboards.com and probably talk him into making you one there. But at the age of 66, after a 2-year hiatus, Roger is making a return to board building. And the very first board that he built upon his return was this exact Dreamfish Twin that I've been riding through all the month of April and that I'm actually going to be giving away on June 1st. And much like the album Twinsman that I reviewed in February, the Roger Hinds Dreamfish defies traditional genre categorization. I'm going to call it an alternative shortboard. It's technically not a fish, even though it's called the Dreamfish. And usually when people say shortboard, they're referring to a high performance thruster, but this board isn't that either. It's somewhere in the middle between a fish and a thruster. And if you were simply to look at the measurements, you might say that it's kind of a fuller volume shortboard, but when you account for all of the other design features, it isn't. With the twin fins and the swallowtail, you might want to call it a fish, but I was actually surprised to hear Roger say that the seed of this design is in the single fin. Super Bowl Sunday, you shaped this board.
Yep.
Why this design? What was the impetus?
I was watching a lot of boards, twin fins. You know, what was old is new again, and channel bottoms and so on. And I just went out there and I had, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 blanks in stock to choose from. So I just grabbed the shortest one and it was a 6.5A, a US blanks. And I just started farting around with it and, okay, if I'm going to build a twin fin, what am I going to do? Because I haven't built twin fins in a lot of years. But okay, what am I going to do if this is what I'm doing, coming back in to see how this feels to me, what am I going to do? So I basically just laid out the blank and started throwing some templates together. I kind of took the Dreamfish, the board that you rode, as that idea. But then, as I was laying it out, I've always thought that a twin fin rides much like a single fin in the sense that you're turning a lot more off your rail than you are off of your fins. So I just incorporated, I took, I think now that I'm looking at it sitting here on the floor, I think what I did was I pulled the nose in a little bit more than the Dreamfish. I pulled the center in a little bit, and then I pulled the tail in about 1 inch. But I did that by taking the curve out of the tail. So from your back foot, maybe 1/3 up, it just kind of comes straight back. And that allows you to push and come around that corner. It seemed like to me that would be, you know, how to start making them after 30 years and see how they go.
Is that outline, you referenced single fin, is that outline more similar to a single fin outline?
You know, I don't know who came up with it. It was probably, I would think, Tom Parrish. But in the mid-70s, mid-70s, I think, one of those guys took the curve out of the tail and straightened it out, the last third of the board, and it changed everything. I mean, you could actually come around a corner on one of those things like crazy. A lot of the California boards had curve all the way through, and the stuff that they were riding at the pipeline obviously had a lot of curve, but the ones that you were riding at Sunset or somewhere like that, it changed everything when they put that straight part in the tail. I don't know who came up with it, but I was quick to jump on board, that's for sure.
So in terms of this board, as a modification from the Dreamfish of the past, it's more similar to that single fin kind of.
Well, all it is just a tighter version of the Dreamfish, so it'll ride tighter in the pocket because it's that board's 20 and a half. My normal Dreamfish is like 21. And that board has a 15-inch nose. My normal Dreamfish, I think, is 15 and a quarter. And then that board is 15 and 3/4 tail. The Dreamfish is 16 and 3/4. So it has a lot more curve throughout. But I just kind of compacted everything.
Roger said that this board is narrower than the original Dreamfish, and then he gives the measurements. 1/4 inch narrower in the nose, 1/2 inch narrower in the middle. Those adjustments, they seem nominal, but they actually amount to a lot of foam, a lot of volume. Of course, this board has never been near a computer or a machine, so we don't have the actual volume measurements. But in terms of dimensions, it's 6 feet in length, 20.5 inches wide, 14 and 3/4 inches wide at 12 inches from the nose, and 15 and 3/4 inches wide at 12 inches from the tail. The paddleability of this board is high. It's as high, if not higher, than any other 6-foot shortboard that I've ridden. Obviously, it's not going to paddle as fast as a longer board, but you can spin it around and kind of dig in faster than anything in its range. And what about maneuverability? What will this board do once you are up and riding? I found that honestly, it does pretty much everything that you would expect your high-performance shortboard to do, only at about 80% of the turning radius, so not as tack sharp, but it does it with double the ease and forgiveness, and even about 20% more speed. So in practical terms, if you're going to be surfing lowers and you want to score 0.5 point higher than your buddy by aiming for 12 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock, then don't ride this. And for that matter, don't ride any fish. You should probably be riding a thruster. But the narrower package and the modern bottom of this board will absolutely allow you to hit the lip, even drift the fins a little bit, and maintain kind of effortless drive between maneuvers, which is really where I found that this board compensated the most for my own personal deficiencies.
It's narrower.
It is narrower. And so that would let you ride it tighter in the pocket. And I just didn't want a whole bunch of tail area there for when you went to roll the board over. There seems to be a couple schools of thought on V. I'm a big fan of it. I've watched it since '71 on the North Shore. That's how you turn a board at high speeds. It rolls over, or it doesn't. If it doesn't roll over, you're tracking straight to the beach.
Yeah.
And on a wider tail like that, I'm a big fan of it because it'll just allow the board to roll over. And I think that's a big key in the board turning straighter up the face. You take the ear out of the nose and tighten up the tail a little bit till it rides tighter in the pocket, and then incorporate that shortboard rocker and the hard edge the hard edge that runs up 5 inches in front of the fins. You have a board there that's going to go fast through the water and change directions real easy. My bottom contours are very simple. I used to be an open ocean paddler. In the 90s, I used to do the Hennessy Cups and stick my butt out in the middle of the ocean for 3 or 4 hours paddling. Jesus. You learn how a board goes through the water real quick. When you're that far out in the ocean, you kind of feel what the board's doing. So my bottoms are very simple. I try to do whatever I do to the opposite side of the extreme. I don't want a whole lot of what I've experienced in the past under my feet, and then under some other people's feet who I've surfed with in the past and built their boards. Anything deep, it seemed like it cavitated when you started surfing bumpy surf. It seemed like the board wouldn't want to go like this. No, I'm not saying that's under everybody's feet, but under mine and Army's feet, for sure. That's what happened. And so water doesn't run tip to tail on the board, only when you're paddling to catch the wave. When you're surfing, the water's coming across the board. So I try to make it to where the water gets in and out really fast. So my concaves are not real deep. My channels that I put on there are not real deep. They're designed to build pressure. When you're pushing, it'll build a little pressure back there and it'll go, go, go. Everything I do is very subtle. Like again, if you have a board that travels through the water with very little resistance, it's going to go wherever you want it to go. And that's
So this is flat entry,
flat
rocker.
entry. Yeah.
And then what's the middle of the board like?
I have flat all the way up to your front foot, and then I put V from right in front of the channel. I'll put V, and it's very slight where it starts, and then it comes out to probably where your fins are. At the back of the fin, it's probably 3/8 of an inch, and then I flatten off the last 4 inches of the board, so you got something to push off there, and then I just incorporated just a real shallow channel, like maybe 3/8.
Well, things got complicated real quickly there in that explanation.
Yeah.
Despite your claims of it being simple, there's a lot of complication there.
Again, if you look at it under the lights, it's a pretty simple bottom. If you look at it, you can clearly see there's no place for the water to be disrupted. It's just going to go right through.
Can you explain what V is?
You take the flat surface from the nose to about the middle of the board. Well, on my big wave boards, hell, I run V on 10-foot, 10-6 guns. I run V halfway up the board because it opens up that sweet spot to where when you're falling out of the sky on a 20-foot wave and you hit, you can turn from anywhere on that board.
You need all the help turning you can get on a big board.
It's gonna roll over a little bit easier. So all you're doing is taking the bottom and making it look like this. It starts real gradual and then it comes back. And like I say, it comes to maybe, if you put a level on it, it might tilt 3/8 of an inch to each side. But then I put it flat the last 4 inches of the tail. And your swallowtail is like 2 3/4 inches deep. So you figure another 1.25 inches up in front of your swallow right there. It's flat from there out the exit.
Got it. So clarifying for the listener, V is essentially the reason why it's called V is it's an upside down V.
Exactly.
So the stringer would then be higher than the
Yes.
foam surrounding it, and it obviously gradually goes down towards the rails.
Yep.
So, and that, like you said, allows a board to turn. So rather than having a flat surface sitting on the water, once you put those angles on it, obviously you tilt your toes
Yeah.
and it'll push down easier. You lean onto your heels and that side will push down easier. So I think people understand it up till there, but what happens when you put a single channel down the middle of the V like you have here?
All that does is it's very subtle. It will create a lift, for lack of a better word, so where you can push and build pressure and just jump and jump and jump, and it'll go faster and faster. It's just a little air pocket in there. You know, V through history has, I mean, anybody should watch Barry Kanayapuni surf Honolulu Bay on Five Summer Stories. He's moving that freaking 8-foot board like people can't even do today on shortboards. That is how V goes through the water.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will rewatch that.
It's fantastic.
If I could pull the clip, I'll put it in the YouTube.
It is fantastic. He's flying and just changing directions like crazy.
You talked about a little pocket of pressure underneath and being able to push off of it.
Yeah.
My experience with the board, which I don't know if it flies in the face of what you just said, but maybe you could talk me through it, is that I don't pump it at all. Like I don't, the way you described it made me think of like a pumping, like a check kind of turn pump. I find this board to draw out everything a lot easier. Like I don't feel any impulse to give it a kick. I just lean and it has a lot of drive inherently. And if I take off that lean, then maybe I would have to check it back into gear. But if I just put gradual pressure on it, you feel the afterburners kicking in, and it does all the work for you.
My boards, for the most part, I try to make them to where if you force them too much, they will bog down. My boards want to run. And again, that's the whole bottom, how I do the bottom. The board goes through the water real easy. It's going to go fast, and it's going to change directions
That's
real
what
easy.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I don't really quite understand that air pocket illustration of the single channel, nor am I convinced, by the way, that I can attribute any amount of speed to that channel rather than, say, the flatter entry rocker. But what I did sense from the channel was a certain bite and control. So if the V kind of helps with leaning the board over and turning, that single channel gives you added control for when you're in the turn. One particular turn I did, I was starting into a roundhouse, and when I started to turn my shoulders and my head and kind of started to look up at the top of the whitewash, I was able to really grip and steer into that rebound and actually bank off the top of the whitewash, which is of course something that your 18.5-inch wide shortboard thruster can do without a problem. But it's not something that a lot of 20-inch wide boards can do, and certainly not with 15-inch wide tails. And that's where Roger really kind of hit a home run with this design, was by adding modern but subtle elements into this classic design without compromising any of the user friendliness. I really found that this board smoothed out my surfing. I got my best results from just a steady application of pressure, which also gave constant acceleration. If I ever let off that pressure and tried to pump the board, I would lose rhythm and only kind of half connect with the lip or a turn. And all of this actually might come back to Roger's single fin concept. If you've ever ridden a single fin, then you know that it kind of smooths out all of your surfing. You cannot force the board to go. You just kind of have to let it go and find trim. And this board has a lot of that DNA in it, only in a zestier package. Part of that zestiness can be attributed to the swallowtail.
No, and me being a front foot surfer through my surfing life, you always wanted a board that would run on its own, and because you just want a board to just go really easy. If you have to, I've never was that type of surfer. There is that type of surfer, and they're really good surfers, and they're pushing it ninja. But my boards tend to just go smooth through the water.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I want the board to just go through the water with least resistance.
That's what this board did. That was my experience with this. So the swallow, you talked about the depth of the swallow.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? How does that affect it? Like, what does a deeper swallow do versus a shallow swallow?
Well, what is that board? 6 feet?
Yeah, 6'0".
Okay, so that swallowtail is 2 3/4 inches deep. Let's just call it 3 inches. So now you're turning a 5/8 because the water is going to break at that swallow.
Gotcha.
The water, if it was a round pin, is going to break at the pin.
Gotcha.
The water breaks at the swallow. So you have a planing surface of a 6-foot board. You're catching waves with a 6-foot board, but when you want to change direction, that board is 2 3/4 inches shorter.
Gotcha.
That's why we used to ride the shit out of swallowtails out at sunset, because you're just changing directions like this, and the swallowtail really allows that real smooth transition. Always like that.
What's the design principle behind the single channel? Why not multiple channels?
I've never had really good luck with them under my feet. Army didn't have luck with them under his feet, and I never really had any real team riders through the late 80s and 90s when they were a thing to give me feedback. And again, I like less confusion on the bottom, but other people seem to have success with them. I don't build Bonzers for 2 reasons. I have a lot of respect for the Campbell brothers, and it's not my deal. If you want a Bonzer, you got guys right there who can build the best ones. And if you need 6 channels, man, there's a lot of guys you need to go to besides me. I'm just trying to build something what I know has a really good chance of working, and working again in 2 years later, and standing the test of time.
Got it. What about the edge? You talked about the edge being sharp 5 inches up from the fin?
Yeah, I try to keep my edges depending upon the fin configuration, but this twin fin, it looks like I ran it up a little bit more than that. I want just a 90-degree angle right there. I want you to cut your finger when you're feeling that edge. because that's how the board releases. And so
So-
the water doesn't wrap the rail right there in the tail area.
So more responsiveness.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
What is the rail like throughout the rest of the board?
Pretty relaxed.
Okay.
Pretty relaxed. More of a ping pong ball. And then as it gets to the nose, it's just a smaller. I don't. My boards are. I forget how thick that one is. I think it might be 2 7/8, but I can make that board for a guy my size and my age, 3.5 inches thick, with that same rail, and it's going to ride the same way as it rides under your feet. Because all you want to do is have that rail roll over into the water. What's up here under your belly when you're turning means nothing.
Yeah.
That's why numbers. People ask me, well, how thick is the board going to be? And I don't discuss numbers because it scares the hell out of people. Well, I don't know how thick is that board. That seems thick. Well, it doesn't matter how thick it is in the center, as long as your rails are where they need to be.
Got it.
Fins played a dramatic role in my experience of this board. I started out riding these NVS Album Upright Twins, which I absolutely love. The board worked effortlessly. And then I tried the C-Drive Twins. I have these C-Drives in thrusters as well, and I actually love them. I see no deficiencies in those fins in any board that I've ridden them in. And then Scott Bass has been loving these C-Drive Twins. So I was excited to try them because I love the board and I had high hopes for the fins. Turns out it was actually a mismatch for me. These fins tracked really, really straight. They had a lot of speed, but too much hold. I previously talked about that roundhouse cutback where I was able to kind of bank off the top of the whitewash. I tried to do a similar turn with these fins and they prevented that last half of the turn where I was able to crank a tighter radius. Just the added base has so much hold. I went into the roundhouse and then just kind of opted to down carve into the next bottom turn because I couldn't get the board to crank through that tight radius. So if you look at these fins in the fin box, you can just see that the base takes up a lot of room in relation to the planing surface on the bottom of the board. The base of the fin is big, so it just makes sense that they would be stiffer and harder to steer. I figured it's no big deal. It's a mismatch. I'll just swap back to the Album Uprights and I'll be totally stoked. But Roger insisted on taking measurements, hearing more of my feedback, and then isolating which variables were actually causing this hold and the tracking. And it wasn't just the fin box placement, believe it or not, that needed adjusting, but the angle and the cant of the fin.
The fins I've done in the past were glass-on keels, so you can determine where the back of the fin is. When you shape the board, you can measure up and come in off the rail how far you want it and put a mark where the back of the fin is. And so I actually had to make a few phone calls because I hadn't done any with fin boxes, and I didn't know how far the fin, trailing edge of the fin came past the box. So I made a phone call to Maurice, who makes a bunch of these, Agnello and at Edit Surfboards, and he kind of gave me the Reader's Digest version of where he's putting them. And I noticed on yours, when I was looking at it, the back of the fin, we were good with the placement. I think I would have brought yours in a little bit more off the rail. The ones I'm shaping now, I am doing that. But I'm really stuck on a 6.5 degree cant on the fin. The way my boards ride is I want to set them at a 6.5 degree and off of 90. And I think the ones you got in there, those are beautiful fins. And I'll have to ask you more about how they work, but they look like they're more straight up and down. And so that's going to change how the board works. That's going to run a little drivier out, but it's going to be a little bit stiffer. It's going to ride a little trackier with the fin more vertical. I forget when it was, 2000 or 1999. There was an interview in Longboard magazine, and I don't know why they asked me, but there was a couple of us, Bradshaw, me, I think Randy Rarick was in there, a few other guys, and they were asking questions about the tri-fin placement and angles and such. And I mentioned that I was writing thrusters on a board that I had surfed at the pipeline, that I would run them a little bit straighter and more vertical, because I wanted the board to come out of the turn, because I'm backhand out there. I wanted the board to come out of the turn and make a little bit more distance, as opposed to the way they surf it now. They're falling out of the sky and just.
Yeah.
So I was trying to make my fins to where they would drive a little bit further out, and that's what I would think that would do. I think it's an interesting looking fin. I really like the concept. I like a wide base in the fin. My fin templates that I use, I have a wide base, and it rakes further back with a smaller tip, because the base will cover the area, and when the fin is raked back further, it covers a lot of area, and you don't need a big keel type fin. But I wonder if you could get those into 6.5.
So cant is one thing, which we'll cover. I mean, the base of that fin just looks giant compared to the tail width. Just visually looking at it, it makes perfect sense that the board would track and not pivot or not release, because just look how much base is covering the tail. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I think I would give it another try with
cant.
With 6.5 inch, 6.5 degree, and where I'm setting my boxes now, since that was the first one, I'm setting my boxes a 1/4 inch further off the rail, per what Maurice is doing, and that seems to be better. So I think I would hold my opinion until I got a set of those at 6.5 and tried them again.
Okay.
With the placement I have now, I like that. That looks nice. I would like to see, because what you're telling me, the board goes really fast, and it does exactly what we were talking about. I did in the 80s, in the 90s, with those 3 fins. Is I set them a certain direction at a certain cant to achieve a certain thing I needed to do, and
that was a very specific goal that you were trying to achieve.
yeah.
A specific wave doing a specific thing.
Yes.
We aren't doing that here, and I would imagine, like, with your average customer, they're not giving you that much specificity either. They're probably riding the board at a bunch of different locations on, different conditions and stuff. So
Yeah, but they're all better surfers than me. So.
so my question is, how do you design for that? I mean, just try to give them the most universally pleasing measurements?
The whole twin fin thing is old and new to me, because everything that's being done with the twin fins right now, the fin templates and everything is new to me. And I have a friend, Tiva, who's been riding the twin fins, and he's been instructing me on what his thought is on it, and now your opinion on this, and
what's he riding? What's his opinion?
he's riding an Almeric. I don't know which one it is, the fin.
Okay.
I probably should have that information for you.
But is it a keel style, or is it
is
a
keel
thruster style?
It's a keel style.
Okay.
And he says it works really well.
Um,
Again, surfing is so subjective to what somebody feels under their feet,
I'd be curious to see what the setup looks like. Is he similar size to me?
No, he's taller. He's an open ocean paddler.
Okay.
He's a strong guy.
What size of board is he riding?
Short, 5'8", 6 foot.
Wow.
Yeah, he's strong.
So the degree of cant, back to that, the uprights that I like are 6.5 degrees.
Mhm.
These are 4 degrees.
Yeah.
It's a subtle difference. It's a key point that I want to drive home, is that these subtle differences are very, very noticeable.
No, when we looked at this board the other day, I looked at the fins and I glassed it and I thought, Jesus, did I put those things that vertical? Because I set all my own fins and I know exactly where I want them. And then you had another fin that was the Albin fin, and I put it in there and I went, okay, that's what I'm looking at.
Right.
Okay. I guess you could take that fin and lean it over when you're glassing it and get it where you want it. I just think they probably make them at a 6.5 possibly.
Yeah.
And I would definitely like to see those tried at a 6.5 degree.
Ultimately, in the end, Roger offered to route out these fin boxes and then reset them with the appropriate cant, then relaminate the board so that I can get the best out of these C-drive fins. I laughed it off, saying that's way too much work when I could just ride these fins that I actually know and that I love and I'm more than happy with. So now Roger's insisting on making me a new board with a couple other subtle adjustments. And by the way, this is kind of key. Whatever you ride, isolating these variables and adjusting for them is a valuable part of my own learning experience, but also the shapers. And another important detail, beyond design and shaping, lamination is a whole separate skill and craft, as is sanding. And as was the case for a lot of board builders in the 60s, but is rather rare now, Roger builds all of his boards entirely from start to finish. A lot of the work and intention of the shaper can be undone by the laminator and the fin setter and also the sander. And so a really tight relationship and communication among each of those craftsmen can ensure that the shaper's goals are executed and that the surfer gets the best possible surfboard. Or you can just spend decades learning each of these steps yourself, which Roger has. He's mastered each of these steps over decades, and lamination or glassing is the single most important factor in quality. It is the largest component of structural integrity. The lamination will be the biggest factor in whether your magic board stays magic and for how long.
That one has a 4-ounce bottom and a 4-ounce deck patch with a 5-ounce full length on the deck. I like using 5-ounce on shortboards, especially with color, because it holds the color better than a 4-ounce. And 5-ounce is 6-ounce glass in the warp direction of the board, which is from tip to tail, and then it has 4-ounce in the fill direction of the board, which is across the board. So it comes out to be 5 ounces, and that's basically what I use on all my color work on all my shortboards. Probably under about 7 feet, unless somebody's very specific how they want their glassing schedule. I will use 5-ounce because it holds the color really nice.
Okay. Let's unpack that a little bit for the layperson. So the bottom has less fiberglass than the deck does.
Yeah, I mean, I could have got away with 2 layers of 4-ounce on the deck of that also, because I consider that a shortboard and it's nothing that you're going to need to keep around for a long time. But the 5-ounce really doesn't add much weight. I mean, I'm not a resin pig. When I laminate a surfboard, I drag all the freaking resin off of it. I want the board, the best lamination is something that's saturated 100% and has no dry spots. That is absolutely the best lamination. And as far as that goes, the hot coat and the glossing, you'll see a lot of longer boards that cracks across the bottom, and it's in the resin and not in the fiberglass itself. And that's just because there's a lot of resin on the board, and when it hits maybe the shore break or what have you, the board will flex and it'll crack that resin on the board. So I try to, my hot coats are real thin. I mean, I use Hexcel fiberglass. It's a real flat weave. I just want enough resin to where I can do the procedure. I'm not trying to stack resin on a board for any other reason to make it strong and light and something to sand. I don't overshape the deck of the board, so you're not going to get a lot of dimpling from the blank. And I use real high quality material, and there is a difference. I don't know if I read it or if somebody told me, but I know it was Bosco Burns, and I know that he pulled a strand of fiberglass out of a roll and tried to break it, and he couldn't break it. And then he opened up another box of another brand and pulled a strand of fiberglass out, just one single strand, and it went like that. And that's always stuck with me. And you can do that. It truly happens. And so I have people bring me boards that I glassed 30 some years ago and they still look new.
Materials matter.
Materials matter. And the cost of material to me is inconsequential because what are you going to save? 20 cents a yard on fiberglass or 25 cents a yard on fiberglass, and what do you got? 10 yards, so what's that? $2.50. But I mean, if you're doing 10,000 boards a year or 50,000 boards a year, I guess that adds up.
Yeah.
I mean, but at the end of the day, I don't look at it. That's not my business model.
Yeah.
My business model stops at the end of every board.
I want to detail one other thing you said about not taking a lot of foam off the deck. So can you explain what that means and why that matters and how it relates to strength?
I know that Clark Foam and US Blanks do a lot of testing on how many cuts you can take with a planer and the depth of it before the weight, the density changes. And so when I shape a board, the first thing I do is I outline it and I shape the bottom exactly how I want it. And then I foil the deck down to match that curve. But everything goes from the rail to the stringer. And while I'm coming up to the stringer, with my planer, I'm clicking off to where when I get to the stringer area, probably 3 inches on either side of the stringer, I'm clicked completely out to where I'm just taking the skin.
So the blank, when it shows up, has a hard shell on it,
Yes.
essentially.
Uh-huh.
It's still the polyurethane foam, but the way that it's cured is kind of like a crust.
Yes.
And so you're saying you take a lot of foam off the bottom because the surfer's foot isn't going to be compressing on the bottom. Leave that shell on the deck so the heels actually have a bit more resistance there and they don't dent the deck. That's the concept.
Yeah, all the blanks that I order have the custom rockers what I need for my designs, and so I'm basically just cutting in the bottom and the deck. I'm just foiling and to where it comes up to 0 at the stringer.
Got it.
I don't think it's much different than what anybody else has been doing, but
It's a detail that a lot of listeners have never heard before, though.
yeah.
So
It's all an elliptical cut is what it is. It's all an elliptical cut. It's nothing going straight up and down. It's an elliptical cut.
right,
And so you're taking less off the more you come to the center of the board.
right.
And in regard to the deck, this one is actually pretty neutral. It's flat about 6 inches out from the stringer on either side, right up until about those glue lines, which we'll discuss in a moment, by the way. And then the deck gradually domes down from that flat plateau, foiled outward down into kind of a neutral rail. This flat plateau under your feet provides high stability and I'd say moderate sensitivity. It won't be as sensitive as a board that apexes at the stringer, but the bottom contours and the outline are designed for drive and propulsion. So it doesn't really require that toe tap sensitivity to pump and move the board. Also, something just for context here, something that Roger is going to mention, surfboard blank manufacturers offer a range of blank models so that the shaper can choose one that most closely fits the design of the board that they are building without wasting a ton of foam. Makes perfect sense. Essentially, you don't want a 10-foot blank if you're only going to be shaping a 6-foot shortboard. So these blanks, they're not just offered by length. There could be 3 different 6'4" blanks available, each with a different foam distribution, different widths, different thicknesses, different rocker. The blank manufacturers hire well-known shapers to design the blanks to accommodate specific market needs. So you can imagine in the 70s, there was a sudden need for 8-foot and smaller blanks that never existed before. Now there's kind of a revitalized need for mid-length blanks, but with kind of a different foam distribution than maybe decades past when they were designed for eggs or single fins. Roger is one of the few shapers who has actually been tasked with building some of these blanks over the years. Originally at Clark Foam, now at US Blanks. And he's going to refer to those blanks here. Sometimes he calls them a plug. The plug is in fact what he shapes and then does a really thick, heavy lamination, provides that to the blank manufacturer. They then make a mold out of that plug, and then that mold goes on to make all of the surfboard blanks in the future.
I have my nose thickness 12 inches back from the tip of the nose, and I have my tail thickness a foot up, and I have my center thickness, whether it be dead center of the board or the thickest part of the board is 2 inches in back of the center, or on my 70 style boards, my thickest part is 2 to 3 inches in front of the center for a more forward foil look. My thickness of the tail is usually, well, let me reverse that. The thickness of the nose is usually 1/8 to 1/4 inch thinner than the tail at that same distance for swing weight. I want it to be lighter in the nose area. And I think most blanks, I know the ones I did for US, and I know the ones that Pat Rawson did, they're all kind of the same all the way through. It's a good starting point. Except for the 83H. The 83H, I cut that bottom end. I kind of went against the norm because, and I'll go back to the first plugs I did for Clark Foam in the 90s, late 90 or 2000. Gordon gave us a paper that had instructions. Okay, look, this is the way it's proven to work, and it's very specific, and I didn't have to follow him, but it was a good instruction. And so I went away from the norm when I did the 83H, is I actually cut the bottom end, just as if the end user, but I just indexed it up. So what I did with the 83H is I cut the bottom end. It has a ready to go bottom. You could take a cardboard template, outline that blank, and the rail is really low on that. It doesn't fit on the shaping machine. That blank is a hand shaped blank, because you can band the rails really quick on that one because it was designed for hand shaping. And that is a really good blank for an entry level shaper, or for any shaper. I shaped one today. Because the bottom's cut in already. There's no guessing about it, man.
Yeah.
What I did today was a board that finished out at 3 1/8, and I took a pass off the bottom and chipped in the nose and the tail and flipped it over and band the rail and hit the deck, and I was done. And so I think the majority of the shapers out there now are using thicker blanks to accommodate the machine, but there are some real close tolerance blanks offered at US Blanks, especially because everything's glued up, indexed really good. There's no guessing. You can go in there and hand shape them easily.
Speaking of glue up, this specific board has those 2 glue lines.
Mm-hmm.
What are they, 6 inches out?
I don't remember.
Maybe 5 inches out from the stringer.
Yeah.
Is that purely aesthetic, or is there any?
Yeah. No, it's just to catch the tips of the swallow.
Got
It's
it.
a good look, though.
It is a good look.
Affordable, and I don't know that it adds any structural value to it, but it's a good look.
I would argue it doesn't, but it doesn't compromise it at all
No.
either.
Yeah.
But again, kind of to detail it for listeners who haven't seen it or know of that option, the blank comes the blank starts out as a complete piece of foam. It's usually cut down the center, and then a stringer is glued in. You can obviously pick the type of wood you want and the thickness of the wood and all that, or the width. In this case, there's 2 additional cuts on either side of the stringer, 5 inches out. But rather than gluing a second and a third stringer in there, they simply glued it back together, but they colored the glue.
Yep.
So there's a red glue line on either side of the stringer, and it looks like the stringer might have black glue.
It does.
Okay. So it's glued up with black glue along the stringer and then the red glue lines on the exterior,
That's good.
which is a great look. Does that add a lot of cost for the consumer?
Oh, I think at that size of a blank, and don't quote me, but I think it adds maybe $10 a cut max. I might be on the heavy side with that.
Okay.
Ballpark. That's with my double secret probation discount. Right.
So in wrap up for the board design, I've got other questions about you as well.
Nothing.
In wrap up about the design, can we even still call this a fish?
Now, a lot of people call it a fish because of the fish tail. It's a swallowtail, but call it whatever you like.
What are you calling it?
I'm calling it the Dreamfish Twin because it's the concept came out of the Dreamfish. It's just a more compact version of it. But
it's a different board.
I would gladly change the name if you give me some.
I hadn't thought of it until now, and I will think about it, but I want to delineate these terms because a twin fin, I mean, all fish are twin fins, but not all twin fins are fish. This has the tail shape of a fish, and it has the twin fins of a fish, but otherwise it's not really a fish. I mean, the board is almost more a shortboard than it is. And again, I should delineate those terms too, because I say that to mean a high performance shortboard, but realistically, there's a lot of lengths of boards that could be classified as a shortboard that aren't high performance. So it's difficult to define the genre. It's kind of an alternative shortboard, I would say. A high performance version of a fish / alternative shortboard. How would you define it?
I wouldn't argue with that at all.
It's higher performance.
It's
than
definitely
fish.
a more compact version of it. It's 3/4 of an inch narrower in the width.
I think of a fish, the attribute of a fish or the characteristic of it is surfing small, sloppy waves and going like horizontal real fast, gaining speed in kind of gutless surf, banking off sections and having fun. But once the waves get serious, I would ride something else. And this does that, but it has much more vertical capability, much more pivot and maneuverability, but not so much as a high performance shortboard.
Correct.
So it's in between those things. But I would ride this in good waves or knee-high waves even, right?
Sure. Absolutely. There's a big planing surface there to where you're going to be able to go over the flats of the waves pretty easily. But then it has a rocker to where you're going to be able to turn it more vertical.
So let's recap here. For design, I'm going to call this an alternative shortboard. It's a 6-foot twin fin with a swallowtail. It has a fuller nose, and then it hits its wide point at the center and then maintains a very straight outline out the back of the board. So curvy up top and then straight tapered lines out the back. It has V in the bottom with a single channel between the twin fins. The V allows easy maneuverability for your toes and heels, and that channel increases sensitivity for the steering. And all of that comes in handy because the board is fast. With nearly 15 inches of nose width and almost 16 inches of tail width, there is tons of planing surface, and the soft transition of those bottom contours never disrupts water flow, so the board has tons of drive. The blank was glued up with a dark wood stringer, accented by black glue lines, and then 5 inches out from center on either side, there's those red glue lines that finish directly out each point of the swallowtail. I would ideally ride this board in waves that I actually rode it in yesterday at higher tide in Huntington Beach. The wave breaks out the back with an open face, but kind of a crumbly lip. So you can kind of bank it. There's flat spots that you have to weave through to get to the inside. Then it's real zippy along the inside sandbar. Maybe you can get a float or just bank off a section or something. This board maintains speed through all of those transitions. Plenty of foam for flow, but then plenty of cutaways in that foam, mainly in the tail outline and bottom, for precision maneuverability. I would love to ride this board at a point break as well. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. And then my choice for fins are the NVS Album Upright Twins. This is what I was also riding in the album Twinsman in my previous review. These are great universal fins. For modern shortboards, let's say anything other than a squatty fish, I found these fins to go really well in. Our promo code on surfnvs.com is the word podcast. You save 10% on all the Apex series fins. And as an overall thought, I've not really seen another surfboard like this Dreamfish Twin anywhere. I've seen boards with each of these elements applied in a different design, but nothing that incorporates all of these things together in one package, and I think it's genius.
Well, I didn't know how it was going to go. I just figured if you put a good bottom on it and a decent outline, something good will come out of it.
Yeah. It's a modern evolution in your catalog of boards, you know, like nothing you were making
Nothing.
in 2018 or prior looked like this.
No.
And this thing not only fits in 2021, it's actually different and a modernization and improvement of what other people are doing. Like it incorporates elements of things other people are doing, but it's a step forward in evolution.
The way I think of a design like this, since it's kind of real early for me on this, is it's fluid. We could change so many things on this in the next 5-6 months to where it's just the more information that comes back, the better it will get.
Yeah.
That design is not one-dimensional to where that's what it's going to look like for the next 5 years. I would never do that.
Yeah.
I want to be able to change where the fins go and get different input.
I love this board. As with all of Roger's boards that I've owned, I think I've had about 7 at this point. A couple of quads, an 80s style shortboard, 1 longboard. I find that they all just surf really naturally. There's no adjustment period. They just kind of go effortlessly. I find myself actually not even thinking about the board. Even on my first session, there's no adjustment period. I just get up and I go and I just kind of have fun surfing. And that actually becomes problematic when Roger asks me for feedback because I don't really have much to say other than I like it or it goes good. And then he'll ask me these specific questions which draw more out of me and will dial in some minute variables. And with this board specifically, it was the cant in those fins, and we'll find room for improvement in those subtleties. So whether or not you actually order a Dreamfish Twin from Roger, my advice would be find a shaper that you can work with on this type of stuff. I first saw Roger in the water when I was 18, so 20 years ago, and I've surfed with him a bunch, long enough for him certainly to assess my surfing and help design for it. So that's probably ideal, and maybe you don't have access to that. But the point that I want to make is that the greatest strides that we've made are through refining these subtleties, these subtle details. And I've also had fantastic sessions, individual sessions, or maybe fantastic waves on stock boards from big brands that I just got off the rack. But story, sentiment, bespoke craftsmanship, whatever element of art is factored into all of this, those are substantial aspects of surfing too, and they're also unique to working directly with a shaper. So I've linked to Roger's website in the show notes below, where you can order a Dreamfish Twin. They start at about $700, or you can win this exact board with my wax job on it. I'm giving it away on June 1st. All you have to do to be included is support our podcast network for $5 a month. You can do that on surfsplendorpodcast.com. Navigate over to support the show. We will announce that lucky winner on social media on June 1st. My name is David Scales for Surf Splendor. I hope that you enjoyed my review of the Dreamfish Twin by Roger Hinds Surfboards. Thanks for watching. I'll be back in July with an all-new review.